If it did, statistically, save children's lives, should we have more gun control?
No.
I was about to go to bed, but since nobody listens to this when children aren't getting hurt, if you're voting Republican, you do not care about life. You just care about your guns. Because of Republican legislation, school shootings are much higher in Republican-run states than they are Democratic or purple states. And it's not just school shootings either. This is the child and teen suicide rate. And even before those children are born, they're in more danger in Republican-led states. This is infant mortality. And of course, maternal mortality. Women are considerably more in danger in Republican-led states. It's not just women who are in more danger of giving birth. Teens are as well. Not only that, but the sexual assault rate is also considerably higher in Republican-led states. But Nick, what if I don't want to have kids? Well, in Republican-run states, violent crime is also considerably higher, no matter what the type of crime. And it's not just violent crime, it's also burglary, breaking and entering, and that sort of thing. Living in Republican states is much more dangerous than living in Democratic-run states. And if you choose to have kids, Republican legislation is actively harmful for those kids. I collect all this information, I source it, you can have it for free. I don't charge anything for it. If you care so much about Republicans that you're not willing to look at the data, you also don't care about life. When you say that you're voting with your morals, I want you to know this is what your morals are doing.
But the blue cities! This is a common argument, and let's talk about it. Normally, this conversation involves the same group of steps no matter who's talking about it, and it goes through the same steps over and over and over again. People normally use this argument because most news organizations only report on big cities because it's incredibly difficult to compile crime rates for smaller towns. And big cities are almost always blue, so people end up thinking that blue cities have a much higher crime rate than smaller rural areas, and that's just not true. Because we have found the data and compiled it, and we found that in almost every state, big cities are not the biggest source of crime in those states. So you can find all of this data on the FBI website. This is Tennessee, for example. See how the highest murder rate per capita is small towns? But the thing is, they don't want to use per capita stats because it only takes 1 or 2 murders in those smaller towns to exceed the murder rate in big cities. So then it just becomes a topic of total crime, and they want to compare big blue cities versus big red cities. But when you go and look it up, you find out that big cities are more likely to be blue and smaller towns are more likely to be red. And then of course they say, see, the blue cities have more crime, and that starts the conversation all over again. So right off the bat, this conversation is misleading, false, and it's primarily used to deflect the conversation. Secondly, and most importantly, it's important to ask ourselves why we're comparing stats in the first place. When we look at states, we're trying to determine the impacts of legislation passed by liberal and conservative policies. But cities don't make up their own policies on large scales like that. For example, only 8 states allow cities to make up their own firearm legislation. Drug legalization is also very rarely based off of city law and most widely based off of state laws. Even HIPAA laws have state regulations, and cities are not able to change them. So in contrast, people focused on cities are primarily focused on people, not legislation. Instead of comparing consequences of liberal and conservative policies, they're concerned with blaming problems on liberal or conservative people. It's not about whether Democratic policies are ineffective, it's about whether Democrats are bad people. But the thing is, not only is that not a productive conversation, the claim that Democrats are bad people and prisoners are more likely to be Democrat is categorically false. Because we have asked convicted felons their political beliefs and ideals, and we found out that they're more likely to support conservative candidates and conservative policies. Which means even if many of them say that they support the Democratic Party, they're more likely to vote for Republican candidates. And they're more likely in favor of those Republican policies from those Republican candidates, which again is the most important part. But keep in mind, prisoner affiliation is not helpful in the discussion about how to fix problems. So it's not really important to bring up who the bad people are anyway.